A study is being performed to see the association between haloperidol and neuroleptic malignant syndrome. A case control study will be performed. Which of the following is associated with this type of study? Patients with a history of haloperidol can be the cases, and patients with no history of haloperidol can be the controls. Any patient without a history of haloperidol use should be taken out of the study. C. At the start of the study, the frequency of neuroleptic malignant syndrome should be evaluated in patients with and without history of haloperidol use. Patients with and without neuromalignant syndrome should be evaluated in comparison to the frequency of their haloperidol use. So I'll let you answer the question and then I'll explain. Okay, so the answer is going to be D. Patients with and without neuroleptic malignant syndrome should be evaluated in comparison to the frequency of their haloperidol use. So to understand this question, first we have to understand the different types of clinical studies. So let's start off with the answer, which was case control, and let's talk about it. So in UWorld, they have a nice diagram which divides all the different clinical studies into the past, present, and future. And so starting with case control, so in this case, what you're going to do is first take the group which is going to hold the diseases, and then the other group which is going to be people without the disease. So diseases and without the disease. And so in this case, it would be NMS, right? So neuroleptic malignant syndrome. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go into the past to look at the risk factors and the frequency of those risk factors which end up causing the diseases, right? And so that's the objective. You want to see what risk factors led to this. But in the present day, you're starting off with people that have the disease and people that don't. So in this case, the two variables are going to be a drug and the disease. So in this case, you're going to look for an answer choice that has the disease that they're going to start with. You want a group of people with the disease and a group of people without the disease, and you're going into the past to look for a risk factor, which in this case is the haloperidol. So this is the only answer choice that does that. You have a group with and without the disease process, which is NMS, and then you're going to look for their frequency of haloperidol use. So a useful thing to look at is what it can be confused with, which is a retrospective cohort, and then there's also the prospective cohort. Now, the thing to remember about cohort studies is that you first, in these studies, look at the risk factors. That's why it's in blue, right? So in this one, control, you're looking at diseases, so a group with and without the disease, versus cohort studies, which are looking at risk factors. And now the retrospective and prospective just refer to the timeline, right? So for a retrospective cohort, you're looking at risk factors in the past, and for prospective, you're looking at risk factors in the future, right? And so, or risk factors that they can have right now that are leading to the disease process in the future. But so for this one, so retrospective cohort, so you're going to chart check, right? You're going to look at your records and then look for risk factors. For example, if you had smoking, so you're going to look for the risk factor of smoking in the past. Let's say like their chart shows that they've been smoking for 10 years, look for that, or the group that has not been smoking based on the present day chart checking, and then you're going to look at the disease incidence, and the disease incidence has already happened, right? So you're going to look for incidents of, for example, lung cancer. So you saw the risk factor that was smoking, and they were diagnosed 5 years ago with lung cancer, and so that's how the retrospective cohort works. Versus the prospective, where you look for people that are smoking right now and people that are not smoking, and then you look for who will develop lung cancer, for example, 5 years into the future. So just in summary, for cohort, you're going to start off with the risk factors. So you're once again going to have two variables. One is going to be the disease. So in this case, if I said lung cancer, and then the risk factor, which is going to be smoking. So do they have it or do they not? Do they smoke or do they not smoke? And so same thing. And the only difference is when did they start. So this one, they started, for example, 10, 20 years ago, and then they were diagnosed 5 years ago. Versus this one, you're going to start off with the risk factor of smoking right now, and then do they develop lung cancer 10 years from now, right? And then another one is going to be cross-sectional. So the key between cross-sectional versus cohort versus case control is that both the risk factors and the disease process happen in the present time. So that's the difference. So both of these, for a cohort, we're going into the past or the future, or for case control, going into the past. But for this one, they all happen at the same time. Cross-sectional, you're looking for the risk factors. So they already started smoking, and then they ended up already being diagnosed, right? So it's a snapshot right now. Who is smoking and who also has lung cancer. And this can be done using a questionnaire. So, for example, if I want to know in 2021 how many people are smoking and how many people have lung cancer in 2021, a single snapshot in time, I can send out a questionnaire and get both. And so this would reflect both the risk factor and disease incidence in the present time, which makes it different from the other ones, which are looking backwards. For example, for a cohort, they might be looking back 5 or 10 years, versus cross-sectional is just taking place in the present. And so finally, clinical trial is going to be, for example, if a new statin came onto the market, a new cholesterol-lowering drug came onto the market, we're going to put that in one group and the gold standard in another group. And then we're going to see if the new drug outcompetes the old drug. And so that can be the clinical trial. And so once again, this takes place in the present, but we're looking for the outcome in the future. So to help remember these, just remember, for example, case control. The two C's, like C right here, and then backward C, is encasing the disease process. So case control encases the disease, and that's what you're going to start off with. You're going to have one group with the disease, one group without the disease. And then for cohort, you can just remember that since it's only one word, you can look for the R, and that can stand for your risk factors. I know control in case control has an R, but just think about cohort, since it's only one word, it has the R right here, so it stands for risk factor. And then for case control, it's encasing the disease. So that should help you remember the difference between those two. So in summary, we have case controls that start with the one group with the disease or without the disease, leading into the past, looking for the risk factors. You have the cohorts, which start off with the risk factors, then they look for the disease. Only difference is when it occurs. And then finally, the last two, which is cross-sectional and clinical trials. Cross-sectional, everything takes place at the same time. And then clinical trial, you start off with, for example, an experimental group and a control group and see what happens. So I hope that helped, and thanks for watching.